Okay, independent is the manipulated variable. So it's the thing that you're like changing, or the thing that is changing, that represents the inputs. Or the domain. I'll give you time to write. And then dependent is the responding variable. That depends on the independent variable. And it represents the outputs. Which would be y, or the range. Independent variable is the cause. So that would be your, I'm going to say IV. It says cause. Dependent variable would be like your effect. So the x affects the y. The domain affects the range. The independent variable affects the dependent variable. So when an equation represents a function, the dependent variable is defined in terms of the independent variable. So you'll see usually the independent variable a part of the equation, kind of next to some other numbers, and then the dependent is usually alone, like that. When we say y is a function of x, it means y varies depending on the value of x. So y is a function of x. Y is your dv. It's your output. So if you see a phrase like this, think about what it means. And then the of is saying it is determined by that thing. So IV, independent variable or input, is x. I know I'm throwing a lot of vocabulary at you in this unit so far. So there's a little something that could help you remember it. Dependent is responding and goes on the y-axis, dry. And then mix, manipulated variable, is independent and it goes on the x-axis. If that helps you, sweet. The function, y equals negative 3x plus 12, and that's a linear function, in y equals mx plus b form, represents the amount y in fluid ounces of juice remaining in a bottle after you take x gulps. Identify the independent and dependent. Okay, read this question, and I want you guys to think about what's the cause and what's the effect. The more gulps I take, the less juice that I have, right? So the gulps is your cause, or your independent variable. I'll say IV. Cause is the gulps. And in this case, it represents x. And then the dv, or your effect, would be how much juice you have left in the bottle. I'll just say juice remaining. And that would be y, is what it says. And then it tells us the domain is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. What is the range? You have this equation. You are going to plug in. So we're going to write 2 steps out to the side. I know this is where questions are supposed to go, but I'm going to write 2 steps. The first thing I need you to do is, hold on, replace x with the number from the domain. And then evaluate, which is not the same thing as solving. Evaluate means to find the number answer. So plug in and find the number. So you do that in PEMDAS order. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. That order. So I have this equation. I'm going to replace the x with the numbers from the domain to figure out the range. So y is equal to negative 3. Instead of putting x, let's put 0 plus 12. So everything stays the same except I change x to one of the numbers for my domain. Negative 3 times 0 is 0. So 0 plus 12 is 12. So that is one of the numbers from my domain. Oh, so that's one of the numbers from my range. So after I took 0 gulps, there was 12 ounces left. And then you just keep plugging in. So I'll do the next one with you. So negative 3 times 1 gulp. What's negative 3 times 1? Negative 3. And then negative 3 up 12 would give me positive 9. So after I take 1 gulp, there is 9 ounces left. If you can go ahead of me and do the rest on your own, then go ahead. You don't have to wait for me. I'll keep writing it out. Plug in 2. Multiply. Then add. Plug in 3. Multiply, then add, and do the same for 4. So those 5 numbers are my range. Since they're just a list of numbers, I write them in the squiggle lines, like this. So my range, I'm going to do smallest to greatest, 0 first, then 3, 6, 9, 12. It asks for what is the range, those 5 numbers. So the longer you preheat an oven, the hotter it gets. It starts out at 0 and then it goes up to 350 the more minutes have passed. So our IV is in fact what Grace said. Would be the minutes preheating, and that would be M. And then the dependent is the temperature of the oven, T. So notice it's not X and Y. That's okay. And then it says a recipe calls for an oven temperature of 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Describe the domain and range. So what you need to know is how much time did it take for it to get up to 350. So what I can do is use my equation, or my function. It says the function t equals 19m plus 65. That represents it. So we're going to, instead of putting t, we're going to put 350 equals 19m plus 65. Go ahead and solve that equation. So we always add or subtract first, then multiply or divide. I see adding, so I'm going to subtract. I see multiplying, so I'm going to divide. What would that give me? 15. 15 is equal to m. We're going to write a little sentence to help us understand what that means. So 15 was M, and we just put 350 in the T spot. So what is a sentence I could say? Let's write that. Took 15 minutes to reach 350 degrees Fahrenheit. You need to describe the domain and the range. Temperature was range. Let's start with that. As you're preheating an oven, it starts at 0, right? And then it gets gradually hotter. Maybe your oven is like mine where it actually says the temperature on it. So it's actually going through all the temperatures until it reaches 350. So our range, where does it start? 0. And where does it stop?
350.
350. How many minutes do we start with? 0. And how many minutes do we stop at? Oh. Aren't our variables supposed to be M and T? Dang it. Habit.
Oh.
So our domain, actually for this one, is M. And our range is T. Because it took so it was preheating from 0 to 15 minutes. And during that time, it went from 0 degrees to 350.